Deep inside a tropical landscape, something enormous is hidden. Beyond the trees, a massive agricultural operation is beginning to appear. Hidden beneath the forest canopy is a farm built on a very different scale. Thousands of pigs live inside these buildings. At this scale, the animals become part of a much larger system. Inside, the tropical climate is no longer left entirely to nature. Water is one of the first systems every animal depends on. Food enters the farm through another carefully controlled system.
Before people enter the animals or environment, the process begins with protection.
Every entrance becomes a boundary between the outside world and the pigs. But what enters the farm is only half of the story. Behind the barns, another system is working continuously. For every system around the farm, the animal remains at the center. The larger the operation becomes, the more systems have to work together. So how do you keep an operation like this under control?
To understand the scale, we have to move closer.
The farm is connected by a network of roads and working zones. Every day, resources have to enter the farm before the animals can be fed. Even the movement of vehicles is part of the farm's controlled flow. At a large farm, small details can affect the entire operation. These long buildings are designed to manage thousands of animals under one controlled environment. And one building is only part of the picture. Feed storage is another essential part of keeping the system moving.
Water has to travel through the farm just as reliably as feed.
People move through the farm according to the same organized system. Inside, the real scale becomes easier to understand.
Outside, the forest remains completely different from the controlled environment inside.
But once thousands of pigs share the same environment, scale creates a problem. As the morning warms, another challenge begins to emerge. The first enemy isn't the forest, it's heat.
As the tropical morning gets hotter, the environment inside the barn becomes increasingly important.
For the pigs, heat is not simply uncomfortable. It can affect how they behave and how well they grow.
Pigs have limited ability to cool themselves naturally, which makes environmental control especially important. The solution begins with moving enormous amounts of air through the building.
These fans are not decoration. They are part of the barn's climate control system.
Air movement helps remove heat, moisture, and stale air from the animal environment. Water becomes especially important when temperatures rise.
Every animal must be able to reach clean drinking water whenever it needs it.
The farm also monitors the conditions inside the building, rather than relying on guesswork. Temperature and humidity have to be considered together.
In a tropical climate, controlling the air is a constant balancing act.
Outside the barn, the warm air is continuously pushed back into the tropical environment.
The goal is not to create a perfect climate. It is to keep the animals within a safe and manageable environment.
The animals themselves provide another important signal.
And climate control is only one part of the system these animals depend on. But keeping thousands of pigs comfortable means keeping another system moving: feed.
The process begins when feed arrives at the farm.
The delivery has to be transferred safely into storage before it can reach the pigs. Inside the silo, feed is stored until the farm needs it.
At a large farm, storage has to be large enough to support the entire operation.
From storage, the feed enters the farm's distribution network.
The system moves feed without requiring workers to carry it manually.
Each section of the network has to work together. Eventually, the feed reaches the building where the pigs are waiting.
Inside the barn, one delivery system serves many animals.
The final step is simple. Feed reaches the animals. But multiply this scene by thousands of animals, and the scale becomes enormous. Thousands of individual feeding points have to operate as one coordinated system. Automation reduces repetitive work, but people still have to watch the system. Feeding thousands of pigs is not simply about providing food. It is about keeping an entire system moving. But food is not the only thing that has to move carefully through a farm this large. On a large pig farm, every person entering the animal area becomes part of the disease control system. The process begins before the worker reaches the animals. Hands, footwear, and equipment can all become potential pathways for contamination. That is why controlled farms separate outside clothing from equipment used around the pigs. Even something as ordinary as a pair of boots can become important.
The goal is to reduce the chance of carrying harmful material into the animal environment.
The same principle applies to equipment that moves between areas. The farm creates physical boundaries between different levels of biosecurity. Only after the transition is complete does he enter the animal area.
Movement inside the farm is controlled just as carefully as movement into it.
Simple rules can become critical when thousands of animals share one production system.
The objective is not to isolate every pig from the world.
It is to control what crosses the boundaries around them.
Because when thousands of pigs live together, disease can spread through a population quickly.
That is why workers constantly observe the animals, as well as the equipment.
Every transition creates another opportunity to protect the animals. In a mega farm, biosecurity is built from hundreds of small decisions. But disease control is only one part of keeping thousands of animals alive.
Another resource has to reach every animal, every day. Water. Water enters the farm through a network designed to keep supply moving. Before it reaches the animals, the water system has to be monitored and maintained. Pumps keep the pressure moving through the network.
Inside the barn, the network becomes much more direct. For the animal, the entire water network becomes one simple action: drink.
But behind that simple moment is a much larger infrastructure.
Multiply one drinker by thousands of animals, and water becomes a major farm-wide operation. Workers have to make sure the system keeps working before a small problem becomes a large one. A small leak may look insignificant, but across a large system, maintenance matters. But every drop that enters a farm this large eventually has to leave. Every drop that enters this farm eventually becomes part of another system. Wastewater is collected instead of simply being allowed to spread through the farm. First challenge is moving everything away from the animals efficiently. Workers have to know where the waste is going before they can manage it. Even basic maintenance can prevent a small blockage from becoming a much larger problem. Underneath the animals, another network is constantly carrying material away.
From the barns, the collected wastewater moves toward treatment. Here, the farm has to deal with everything produced by thousands of animals. Treatment begins by slowing down and separating what can be managed. The treatment process is a chain, not a single machine.
Pumps keep the treatment system moving from one stage to the next.
Someone still has to watch the system while the machines do the work. Monitoring pressure and flow helps keep the system operating correctly. The treatment system matters not only for the farm, but also for everything beyond its boundary. The final goal is to manage the water before it returns to the wider environment.
The farm cannot operate separately from the environment around it.
Environmental management becomes part of everyday farm work. Good systems still depend on regular maintenance.
Behind every barn is another system most people never see.
And all of these systems eventually come back to the animals.
Inside, the result of every system is visible in the animals themselves.
A healthy animal is the visible result of many invisible systems working together.
Feed, water, air, hygiene, and waste management all have to work at the same time. The worker's job is not simply to operate machines. It is to notice when something changes. Automation can reduce repetitive work, but it does not remove the need for human attention.
A small adjustment can keep the entire feeding sequence moving.
From one end of the building to the other, the operation behaves like one connected machine. And what looks like one farm from the outside is actually a network of systems. Thousands of animals depend on this network every single day. But this is only the visible part of the story. Behind this farm is a supply chain that begins far beyond these walls. From above, the scale of the operation becomes much easier to understand. What looks like one building is actually a collection of specialized systems working together. Every day, vehicles, workers, feed, water, and animals become part of the same schedule.
And the feed arriving here is only the final step of a much larger journey.
Before these pigs ever eat it, the feed has already traveled through a long supply chain. The story of this farm actually begins far beyond its gates.
Crops such as corn become the raw materials that help feed modern livestock systems. Every grain begins with a field, a harvest, and a chain of decisions. Harvesting turns a field of crops into a resource that can enter the global feed system.
From the field, grain moves through storage, transport, and processing before it ever reaches the farm. Storage facilities keep enormous quantities of grain available for the next stage.
Inside a feed factory, raw ingredients are transformed into a controlled nutritional product.
The proportions matter because the final feed has to meet the needs of the animals receiving it.
Once the feed's ready, another journey begins.
The finished feed travels from factories to farms like the one we are exploring.
A journey that may begin hundreds or thousands of kilometers away eventually ends at the farm gate.
And then the entire chain becomes invisible again.
For the pig, none of the supply chain is visible.
It simply receives the feed, drinks the water, and grows.
But behind this ordinary moment is an extraordinary amount of infrastructure. This is no longer just a pig barn. It is an entire production system. Every part exists because another part depends on it.
And someone has to keep all of it working every single day.
Technology can automate many tasks, but farming still depends on people. And while the world outside becomes quiet, the farm keeps running. There is no real off switch for a farm of this scale.
While most people are asleep, the systems continue working.
From outside, it may look quiet. Inside, thousands of animals still depend on the system. What we see here is more than a farm. It is one small part of the system that helps feed the world. The next time you see food on your table, remember that behind it may be an entire world you never get to see.